The Philippine-American War, a struggle for freedom and empire. Introduction: a nation's dream of independence. The year was 1898, and the world was watching as the Spanish-American War drew to a close. For over 300 years, the Philippines had been under Spanish rule, enduring oppression, forced labor, and cultural suppression. By the late 19th century, the desire for independence had erupted into revolution, with Filipino revolutionaries waging a fierce struggle against their colonial rulers. Led by General Emilio Aguinaldo, Filipino forces had made significant gains, forcing Spain to cede control of much of the countryside. When the United States declared war on Spain, Filipino revolutionaries saw it as an opportunity for freedom. A bitter betrayal. On June 12, 1898, in the town of Kawit, Cavite, Aguinaldo declared Philippine independence. The Filipino flag was raised, the national anthem played, and a republic was proclaimed. The dream of sovereignty, it seemed, was finally becoming reality. But across the Pacific, in Washington, D.C., another decision was being made, one that would shatter those hopes. Under the Treaty of Paris, signed on December 10, 1898, Spain ceded the Philippines to the United States for $20 million. For the Filipinos, this was an unimaginable betrayal. They had fought for their freedom, only to be handed from one colonial power to another. The Americans, led by President William McKinley, argued that the Filipinos were not ready for self-governance. The United States, he claimed, had a duty to civilize and educate the Filipinos. Filipino leaders rejected this outright. Tensions boiled over, and soon, the Philippines and the United States were on the brink of war. The spark, a shot in the night. February 4, 1899, the war begins. It was a warm night in Manila, and the atmosphere was thick with tension. For weeks, American troops, under General Elwell S. Otis, had been patrolling the outskirts of the city, facing off against Filipino soldiers stationed nearby. The two sides eyed each other warily, knowing that any spark could ignite a full-scale war. That spark came on the evening of February 4, 1899. An American sentry, stationed on the San Juan Bridge, spotted a group of Filipino soldiers crossing into an area controlled by the U.S. Army. Uncertain of their intentions, the American soldiers shouted for them to stop. The Filipinos, not understanding English, continued forward. Then a single gunshot rang out. No one knew who fired first, but within moments, the quiet of the night was shattered by gunfire. By morning, the war that the Filipino people had feared and the United States had underestimated was in full motion. The battlefield, a fierce resistance, a fight against the odds. From the beginning, it was clear that the Filipinos were at a severe disadvantage. The U.S. Army was well-equipped, armed with modern rifles, artillery, and warships. In contrast, Filipino troops, though highly motivated and battle-hardened, relied on outdated Spanish-era firearms, homemade weapons, and even beyond-the-lookout knives. Yet, despite these challenges, the Filipinos fought with relentless determination. Led by General Aguinaldo, they quickly adopted guerrilla tactics, using dense jungles, mountains, and swamps to their advantage. Hit-and-run attacks ambushed American patrols. Bridges were destroyed to halt U.S. reinforcements. Villagers provided intelligence and supplies to Filipino fighters. This frustrated the Americans, who found themselves fighting an enemy they could rarely see. The Battle for Manila. The war's first major engagement took place in Manila, where Aguinaldo's forces launched an all-out assault to reclaim the city. For 2 days, thousands of Filipino fighters stormed American positions, but the U.S. Army's firepower proved overwhelming. By February 6th, Manila remained under U.S. control, and Aguinaldo was forced to retreat north into the jungles of Luzon. The march into the countryside. With Manila secured, the Americans launched a full-scale invasion, marching into the rural provinces where Aguinaldo's forces were regrouping. Town after town fell to the U.S. Army as American soldiers swept across the landscape. Filipino fighters refused to surrender, engaging in desperate battles, only to retreat into the mountains when overpowered. The war quickly devolved into brutal guerrilla combat, with both sides committing acts of cruelty in their struggle for dominance. Brutality on both sides. American retaliation. The guerrilla tactics of the Filipinos enraged the U.S. military. Determined to crush the resistance, American troops adopted ruthless counterinsurgency measures. Torture tactics like the water cure were used to extract information from prisoners. Entire villages suspected of aiding rebels were burned to the ground. Filipino civilians were rounded up and placed in reconcentration camps, where thousands died from disease and starvation. The Balangiga Massacre, 1901. One of the war's most infamous incidents occurred on the island of Samar in September 1901. Filipino guerrillas, disguised as villagers, launched a surprise attack on American troops stationed in the town of Balangiga. Dozens of U.S. soldiers were killed, their bodies mutilated. In retaliation, General Jacob H. Smith ordered a campaign of total destruction, instructing his men to kill everyone over the age of 10. The island was devastated, with villages burned and thousands left dead or homeless. These atrocities stained America's reputation and fueled debates about the morality of the war. The war's end, a nation in chains. By 1902, the Filipino resistance was on the brink of collapse. On March 23, 1901, Aguinaldo was captured by American forces. Without his leadership, the Filipino resistance crumbled. On July 4, 1902, President Theodore Roosevelt declared the war officially over. Yet, while the war had ended, the struggle of the Filipino people was far from over. For the next several decades, the Philippines remained under American rule, facing continued repression, forced Americanization, and economic exploitation. Legacy: a war forgotten, a nation changed. The Philippine-American War remains one of the most overlooked conflicts in U.S. history. Over 200,000 Filipino civilians perished, many from famine and disease. The war exposed the hypocrisy of American imperialism, as the U.S. claimed to promote freedom while suppressing it abroad. It laid the foundation for Filipino nationalism, inspiring future generations to fight for true independence, which they finally achieved on July 4, 1946. The Philippine-American War, a struggle for freedom and empire. Introduction: a nation's dream of independence. In the twilight of the 19th century, the Philippines stood at the crossroads of destiny. For more than 300 years, the islands had been a colony of Spain, ruled with an iron grip. The Filipino people endured oppression, forced labor, and heavy taxation while their resources were exploited for the benefit of their colonial masters. By the late 1800s, the winds of revolution had begun to blow. A new generation of Filipino intellectuals and revolutionaries, inspired by European Enlightenment ideals, called for self-governance and independence. The Katipunan, a secret revolutionary society, took up arms in 1896, launching an all-out war against Spanish rule. A false promise of freedom. By 1898, the Philippine Revolution had weakened Spain's hold on the islands. Then, an unexpected event changed everything: the Spanish-American War. The United States, seeking to expand its influence in the Pacific, declared war on Spain in April 1898. The conflict was brief, but decisive. In May, Commodore George Dewey led the U.S. Navy to a stunning victory in the Battle of Manila Bay, crushing the Spanish fleet. Filipino revolutionaries, seeing an opportunity, allied with the Americans under the belief that their struggle for independence was near its end. On June 12, 1898, General Emilio Aguinaldo stood in his hometown of Kawit, Cavite, and declared Philippine independence. A new republic was born, or so they thought. Across the Pacific in Washington, D.C., the U.S. government had other plans. In December 1898, the Treaty of Paris was signed. Spain, defeated and humiliated, agreed to cede the Philippines to the United States in exchange for $20 million. For the Filipino people, it was a devastating betrayal. The United States, which had positioned itself as a liberator, had become a new colonial master. The dream of independence was shattered. The spark, a shot in the night. February 4, 1899, the war begins. By early 1899, tension between Filipino and American troops had reached a breaking point. The U.S. military occupied Manila, refusing to recognize Aguinaldo's government. Filipino troops, unwilling to accept foreign rule, held strategic positions around the city. On February 4th, a tense encounter on the San Juan Bridge changed history. A U.S. sentry, seeing a group of Filipino soldiers approaching, shouted for them to halt. But in the darkness, confusion reigned. A single gunshot rang out. No one knew who fired first, but within moments, the air was filled with rifle fire. The Philippine-American War had begun. The battlefield, a fierce resistance. A fight against the odds. From the outset, it was clear that the Filipinos were at a severe disadvantage. The U.S. Army, led by General Lewel S. Otis, possessed modern rifles, artillery, and warships. The Filipino forces, though brave, relied on outdated Spanish-era weapons, homemade arms, and BOLO knives. Despite these odds, General Aguinaldo refused to surrender. His strategy? Guerrilla warfare. Filipino fighters ambushed American patrols and vanished into the jungles. Bridges were destroyed, cutting off U.S. supply lines. Civilians provided intelligence and food to the resistance. The fall of Manila. The war's first major battle unfolded in Manila. Aguinaldo's forces launched a full-scale assault, determined to drive the Americans out. For 2 days, intense fighting raged in the streets and trenches. But the superior firepower of the U.S. Army was too much. By February 6th, the Filipinos were forced to retreat north, leaving Manila in American hands. A brutal war unfolds. The shift to guerrilla warfare. Realizing that conventional warfare was futile, Aguinaldo ordered his forces to dissolve into small guerrilla units. For the Americans, this new style of warfare was frustrating. The enemy was nowhere and everywhere at once. In response, the U.S. military adopted ruthless tactics. Torture was used to extract information from prisoners. Villages suspected of aiding rebels were burned. Civilians were rounded up into concentration camps, where thousands died from disease and starvation. The Balangiga Massacre, 1901, one of the most notorious events of the war occurred in Balangiga, Samar. On September 28, 1901, Filipino guerrillas, disguised as villagers, launched a surprise attack on U.S. troops. Dozens of American soldiers were killed with bolos and spears. In retaliation, General Jacob H. Smith issued a chilling order. I want no prisoners. I want all persons killed who are capable of bearing arms. The more you kill, the more you please me. American troops razed Samar to the ground, killing thousands. The fall of Aguinaldo, a nation's hope fades. By 1901, the war had taken a heavy toll on the Filipino resistance. On March 23rd, American forces captured Aguinaldo in a daring raid. He was forced to swear allegiance to the United States, and the Filipino resistance began to crumble. By 1902, President Theodore Roosevelt declared the war officially over. But for the Filipino people, the struggle was far from finished. The cost of war. The Philippine-American War was one of the most devastating conflicts in Philippine history. Over 200,000 Filipino civilians died, many from famine and disease. The U.S. military suffered thousands of casualties, but the cost for the Filipinos was far greater. The war left deep scars that would not heal for decades. For 44 more years, the Philippines remained under American rule. It was not until July 4, 1946, that the nation finally gained its independence. Legacy. Lessons from a forgotten war. Despite its profound impact, the Philippine-American War remains one of history's most overlooked conflicts. It exposed the dark side of U.S. imperialism. It solidified Filipino nationalism, laying the foundation for future struggles. It proved that even in the face of overwhelming force, the human spirit refuses to be broken. Conclusion: a struggle that shaped a nation. As the sun sets over the Philippine Islands, the voices of the past whisper in the wind. They tell of a war fought in jungles and towns, of heroes who refused to surrender, of a dream of freedom that never died. The Philippine-American War was more than just a battle between two nations. It was the story of a people's fight to define their own destiny. And in the end, no empire could ever silence the cry for liberty. For even in the darkest of times, the flame of freedom can never be extinguished. If you like this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and become a part of our community. Here, you will find historical wars, inspiring stories, and unique content based on real events. If you want to see more engaging and fact-based stories, hit the bell icon to get notified about our latest videos instantly. Your support means the world to us. Leave a comment and let us know what topics you'd like us to cover next. Raising hands fire. Bell subscribe, share, and help us bring these incredible stories to the world.